True California Haunted Mountains, Part 1. The Sierra Nevada range does not forgive. That's the truth people don't tell in travel brochures with their smiling couples hiking among pine trees and blue skies. Out there, above the tiny desert towns where the cracked highways split into gravel, the mountains rise with teeth of granite and jaws of black forest, and if you stand long enough in their shadows you can feel it. Something older than the gold rush, older than the Miwok legends, something waiting. Folks in Bishop or Lone Pine will tell you about snowstorms in June, about bears raiding campsites, about hunters who go in and never come out. But there are other stories, the ones they tell quieter, when the beer is low and the hour is late. Whispers about voices carried on the wind like a radio tuned just between stations. Faces in tree bark. Lights where no road should run. My grandfather used to say, the mountains aren't haunted, they are the haunting, and when he died, half drunk on morphine in the VA hospital, those were the last words he muttered. I didn't believe him then. I was a city kid, LA raised, more scared of drive-bys than ghosts. But in the summer of 2012, when I drove north with 3 friends to climb what we thought was a forgotten trail, I came to know what he meant. The air grows thin up there, and so does reason. What happened to us in those ridges above Owens Valley is something I've never put into words until now, mostly because writing it down makes it real again, makes the cold creep back into my bones. Yet if I don't tell it, the memory will rot inside me like meat left too long in the sun. So here it is, the truth about the California Haunted Mountains, a truth that began with 4 friends in a beat-up Toyota Tacoma, laughing at ghost stories, and ended with only 2 of us crawling back down the trail, skin torn, eyes hollow, carrying secrets that don't belong to the living. The trip started like every bad decision does, with too much confidence and not enough sense. It was July, heat beating off the LA pavement like the city itself was trying to sweat us out, and my buddy Chris had the idea. Chris was always the ringleader, the one with the cracked smile that dared you to say no. He'd found an old map online, a hand-drawn thing from some hiker's blog that talked about a forgotten mining trail in the Sierras, untouched by tourists, unspoiled, raw wilderness. That word, raw, hooked him. To me it sounded like a warning, like spoiled meat raw, like something festering. But he had a way of talking you into anything. Along for the ride were Lisa, who was Chris's girlfriend at the time, and Mark, the quiet one who never said much but always came when called, like a loyal dog. We piled into Chris's Tacoma, loaded with cheap tents, discount sleeping bags, and a cooler full of Bud Light, and pointed north. The freeway stretched out like a hot ribbon, air shrinking in the rear view, smog blurring into desert. The first hours were easy, music blasting, windows down, wind whipping. It wasn't until we started climbing the 395, the desert giving way to pines and jagged ridges, that the air changed. You don't notice it at first, not consciously. It's more like a prickle under your skin, the way the shadows stretch too long across the road, or how the silence between songs feels heavier than it should. Somewhere past Independence, Lisa pointed out the window and said, "Do you guys see that?" We all looked. Out across the valley floor, where the sun was bleeding down in copper and gold, a flicker of light shimmered on the mountainside. Not headlights. Not a plane. Just a slow, pulsing glow, like a lantern swinging back and forth. "Probably a cabin," Chris said, brushing it off. But Mark, who rarely spoke, muttered, "There's nothing out there. Not on that slope." His voice was flat, but I caught the way his eyes narrowed, like he was remembering something. Nobody pressed him. We just kept driving, the Tacoma rattling, the road narrowing, until finally asphalt gave way to gravel, then dirt, the kind of path where you feel each rock under the tires and the forest closes in on both sides. That's when the sun dipped completely, and the Sierra turned from postcard beautiful to something else, sharp-edged, hungry, watching. I swear the trees leaned closer. By the time we parked at the so-called trailhead, the only light left was the headlights and a thin slice of moon cutting the sky. And in that pale glow, I thought I saw something move between the trunks. Too tall for a man. Too thin for a bear. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows. I wish it had been that we set up camp half a mile in, where the trail widened into a small clearing, just big enough for 2 tents and a fire pit someone had left behind years ago, the stones blackened and cracked. The night had dropped like a curtain, the kind of mountain dark that swallows every shape until the only world left is the circle of firelight. Chris was in his element, grinning as he cracked beers and jabbed at the flames with a stick like he was king of some tiny kingdom. Lisa curled up on a log, her face lit orange, sipping slowly, her eyes darting to the woods every time the wind shifted. Mark sat across from me, hands folded, his expression unreadable. He hadn't touched a beer. "Loosen up," Chris laughed at him, tossing a can his way. Mark didn't even raise a hand. The can clattered into the dirt at his feet. "Don't want it," he said. His voice was so low I almost didn't catch it. "Not here." Something in the way he said here set my teeth on edge, like the word meant more than the clearing. Like it meant the whole mountain. I tried to break the tension. "You've been here before, right?" I asked. His eyes lifted to mine, pale in the firelight, and for a second I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, flat as a nail driven into wood, he said, "My uncle disappeared here." Nobody spoke for a long time after that. Even Chris, who never let a silence last, kept his mouth shut. The fire popped, and from deep in the trees came a noise, not the normal shuffle of branches, but a long dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the forest floor. Lisa straightened, hugging her knees. Chris forced a laugh, too loud, too bright. Probably a deer. But I could see his grip tighten on the stick, knuckles white. Mark didn't flinch. He just stared into the dark like he was waiting for a face to look back. And maybe one did, because in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something pale between the trees, a smear of white against all that black, gone before I could turn my head. The dragging stopped. The forest went still, dead still, no crickets, no owls, just silence pressing against us like a weight. I've never known a silence like that before or since. It was the kind that makes you aware of your heartbeat, of your breath rattling in your throat, of how fragile skin feels when there's nothing between you and the dark. Lisa whispered, "I don't like this place." Mark answered, "No one does." Then he leaned forward and added, almost too soft to hear, "But it likes us." We didn't sleep much that first night. Every time the fire sank low, shadows seemed to press closer, and Chris would leap up, feeding it like a man staving off starvation. Lisa eventually curled inside the tent, zipper rasping shut like a scream swallowed mid-throat. Mark stayed by the fire, staring into it as though he were reading something in the flames. I laid in my bag, the nylon crinkling loud against the silence, trying to convince myself it was just nerves. Cities have noise baked into them. Sirens, car horns, neighbors shouting. Out here, that blanket of sound was gone, and in its place was listening. The woods listened. I swear to God, lying there, I felt it, like 1,000 eyes just outside the tent's skin, watching me breathe. Sometime past midnight, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of whispering. At first I thought it was Lisa, maybe talking in her sleep. But when I rolled onto my side, I saw her through the nylon wall, curled tight, her chest rising and falling in deep, even rhythm. The whispering wasn't inside the tent. It was outside. Low, soft, two voices. One hissed like dry leaves, the other wet and gurgling, like someone trying to speak through water. My mouth dried out, and for a moment I couldn't move. The voices circled the tent, closer, closer, until I swore I felt breath stir the fabric. Then Mark's voice cut through, sharp and low, "Leave them." Just those two words, spoken to the dark. The whispering stopped. My pulse hammered. I waited, every nerve stretched, until finally the drag of footsteps moved away, melting into the trees. I don't know if I fell asleep again or just lost time, but when morning came, the world looked harmless, sunlight dripping through pine branches, blue sky crisp as glass. Chris cracked jokes about our spooky first night. Lisa wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, and Mark looked like he hadn't blinked once. When I pulled my boots on, though, something inside me froze. The dirt around the tent was scuffed, clawed in strange wide arcs, as though something had circled us over and over. Not animal tracks, not quite human. I didn't say a word. I just tightened my laces, and when Chris called, "You ready to hike?" I nodded. But in my gut I already knew, we weren't alone out here, and the mountain didn't want us leaving the way we came. The trail itself was a scar carved into the mountain, half-eaten by weeds and time. Every step crunched gravel that looked older than bones. Chris marched up front, swinging his pack like a badge of courage, while Lisa trudged behind him, her shoulders stiff, eyes flicking to every tree hollow like she expected something to crawl out. I brought up the middle and Mark, of course, took the rear. He didn't talk. He just walked, slow and steady, scanning the woods like a man on guard duty. The air grew thinner as we climbed, but not just from altitude. It was the kind of thinness that makes sound strange. Our voices felt swallowed, like the forest was eating every word. Around noon, when the sun was high, we came across something that wasn't on the map. The trail bent into a ravine where a wooden bridge stretched across a dry creek bed. The bridge should have been long dead, planks rotted, ropes frayed, but it still stood, swaying slightly in the breeze. On the far side, carved into the granite wall, was a symbol. Big, crude, almost burned into the rock. A circle split by a jagged line, like an eye with a scar. Lisa froze when she saw it. "What the hell is that?" she asked. Nobody answered. Chris, of course, tried to play tough. "Some old miner graffiti," he said, though his voice wavered. He tested the bridge with his boot, and when it held, he strode across. Lisa wouldn't move. Her face had gone pale, lips pressed tight. "We shouldn't," she whispered. Mark finally spoke. "He's right. We shouldn't." That was enough to make my stomach churn. Mark never protested, never hesitated. If he was telling us not to cross, then something was wrong. But Chris was already halfway over, laughing, calling us cowards. His shadow stretched long across the planks, black against the sun. And then, swear to God, it shifted. Not his shadow. Bigger, taller. Something leaned across the ravine beside him, a darker outline that didn't belong to any of us. I blinked, and it was gone, but the ropes of the bridge groaned, and the boards beneath Chris's boots creaked like they wanted to snap. He made it across, grinning like a fool, and waved us over. Lisa shook her head. Mark stood still as stone. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. But my chest was tight when I stepped onto that bridge, every nerve expecting it to give way, every glance down into the dry creek bed filled with visions of bones waiting for company. The symbol burned into my memory. That scarred eye seemed to follow us as we moved higher into the mountains, and though the sun blazed above, I couldn't shake the feeling we'd already crossed into somewhere we weren't meant to go. We didn't the bridge much that first night. The trail seemed different. Every time the fire sank low, and more like shadows seemed to press way through the trees. And Chris would leap up, pines here were feeding older, it like a man staving off starvation, as if fire had licked them centuries ago and left the tent, scars that never healed. Shut like the air carried a sour smell, sharp and metallic by the fire, rusted staring into it as though he were reading something in the flames. Though even he had stopped with the jokes. I laid in my bag, Lisa walked close behind him loud against the silence, her fingers brushing his sleeve every so often, trying to convince myself it was just nerves, like she was afraid to lose contact. Noise baked into them. I stayed in the middle, every crunch of gravel under my boots echoing too loud, that blanket of sound was gone, muttering under his breath, listening. I couldn't catch the words, but the rhythm was steady, to God, like a prayer lying there, or a warning. I felt it. After another hour, we stumbled on something that shouldn't have been there. Me breathe. A cabin. Sometime not past on the midnight. I must have dozed off Chris had because found, I woke to the sound of whispering. Hiker form. At first I thought it was there Lisa, in a hollow, maybe talking in her sleep, by leaning pines. But when I rolled onto my side, I saw her through the nylon wall, bent, windows dark and hollow, chest rising, but it wasn't falling in deep, no dust collapsing it. The whispering wasn't tearing inside the tent. It looked like something left waiting. Low, Chris, soft, naturally, grinned. One hissed like dry leaves, he said. The other wet and gurgling, like someone trying to speak through water. She hugged herself out, and for a moment I couldn't move. She expected it to open any second. The tent. I wasn't thrilled either, but I admit the thought of sleeping under a roof instead of thin nylon tempted me. Then Mark's voice cut through, sharp and low. "We don't go in there." Just those two words, sharp, spoken to the dark. Rolled his eyes. The whispering stopped. "It's perfect." My pulse hammered. Shelter. I waited. Supplies. Every nerve stretched. He started toward until finally the drag across the footsteps moved away, rising melting into the trees. Mark hissed. I don't know if I fell asleep again or just lost time. His voice but when morning in a way I'd never heard before. Harmless, brittle, sunlight like dripping through pine branches. That was when the wind kicked glass, slamming through the trees, jokes about rattling the cabin's walls. First night. From
Lisa
inside
wouldn't meet
came a
anyone's
sound,
eyes,
soft,
and Mark looked
faint,
like he hadn't
but
blinked
enough
once.
to freeze us.
When I pulled my boots on,
Three
though,
knocks,
something
slow
inside
and
me
deliberate,
froze.
like
The
knuckles
dirt
against
around the
wood.
tent was scuffed,
We all stood
clawed
there,
in strange,
the hollow
wide
spinning in
arcs,
silence,
as though
except
something
for the
had
echo
circled
of
us
that
over
knocking.
and over.
Lisa
Not
grabbed
animal
Chris's
tracks.
arm. Not quite
No,
human, she whispered.
I didn't say a
Please,
word.
no.
I just
Chris
tightened my
wavered,
laces,
but
and
only
when Chris
for a
called,
heartbeat.
"You ready to
Then
hike?"
he grinned again,
I
like a
nodded,
mask pulled
but in
tight.
my gut, I already
Probably
knew.
just the wind.
We weren't
he
alone
said,
out here,
and he reached
and the
for the
mountain
door.
didn't want us
The
leaving
handle
the way
turned
we
under
came.
his hand,
The
like
trail
it had been
itself
waiting.
was a scar
The
carved
door
into the
creaked
mountain,
open,
and what
half-eaten
spilled
by
out
weeds
wasn't
and
darkness.
It
Every
was cold,
step crunched
a
gravel
draft
that
that
looked
cut
older
through
than
summer
bones.
air like knives
Chris
of winter,
marched up front,
carrying with it
swinging
the
his
faintest
pack like a
sound of
badge of
whispering.
courage.
That
While
same
Lisa
dry
trudged
leaf
behind
hiss,
him,
the
her
same
shoulders
gurgle-like
stiff,
words spoken
eyes flicking
underwater.
to every
My
tree
stomach
hollow like
dropped.
she expected
The
something
mountain
to
wasn't
crawl
just
out.
watching us
I
anymore.
brought up the middle.
It was
and
inviting
Mark,
us in.
Of course,
Chris
stepped
took the
over
rear.
the threshold
He
like
didn't
a fool
talk.
rushing into a
He just
punchline.
walked,
Only he
slow
thought
and
was
steady.
funny.
The
Scanning
rest
the
of us
woods like a
hesitated,
man on guard
but the
duty.
problem with
The air
hesitation
grew
is that it
thinner
makes
as
you
we
look
climbed,
weak, but
and
not
none
just
of
from
us wanted to
altitude.
be the one who
It
broke.
was the kind of thinness
Lisa
that
clung
makes
to his
sounds strange,
sleeve,
whispering
Our
his
voices
name,
felt
but he
swallowed,
pulled free,
like the forest was
swaggering
eating
inside
every
like
word.
the place belonged
Around
to him.
noon, when
I
the sun was
followed.
high,
God
we
help
came
me,
across
I followed,
something that wasn't
because
on the map.
some part of me
The
thought
trail
it'd be
bent
worse
into
to
a
let him go
ravine where a
alone.
wooden bridge
The
stretched
smell hit
across a
first,
dry creek
damp
bed.
earth and
The
something
bridge should have been
sour-sweet,
long dead,
like flowers
planks
left
rotted,
too long in a
ropes
vase,
frayed,
but it
decomposing
still
into
stood,
black water.
swaying slightly
The cabin
in the
was
breeze.
one room
On the far
walls made
side,
of rough timber,
carved into
a
the granite
fireplace
wall,
cold
was
with
a
ashes
symbol,
that looked fresh,
big,
though no
crude,
smoke
almost
rose from the
burned
chimney.
into the rock.
A table stood in the
split
center,
by a jagged
scarred
line,
and gouged
like an
with
eye
deep
with a
cuts,
scar.
as though someone
Lisa
had taken a
froze when she
blade
saw
to it
it.
over and over.
What the hell is that?
Carved into
she
the wood
asked.
was the same
Nobody
symbol we'd
answered.
seen on the rock.
Chris,
the
of course,
ice
tried
tried
to
by
play
a jagged
tough.
scar. Some old
My
minor
throat closed
graffiti,
when I saw it,
he said,
Lisa
though his
whimpered.
voice wavered. Mark hadn't
tested
stepped
the bridge
inside.
with his boot.
He stood
and when it
framed in the
held,
doorway,
he strode across.
face stone,
Lisa
voice
wouldn't
low.
move.
I
Her
told
face
you,
had gone
he
pale,
said,
lips
this
pressed
place
tight.
takes.
We shouldn't,
That was when the whispers
she
came
whispered.
back,
Not
not faint
finally
like the
spoke.
night before, but
He's right.
stronger, filling the
shouldn't.
corners of the cabin.
That was enough
They
to
didn't
make my
sound like
stomach
one
churn.
voice now, but
Mark
dozens,
never protested,
layered,
never
overlapping,
hesitated.
some
If
fast,
he was telling
some
us not
slow,
to cross, some hissing,
then something was
some
wrong.
wet and bubbling.
But Chris was
None
already
of it made
halfway
sense,
over,
not
laughing,
words we could
calling
understand,
us cowards.
but the cadence
His
was
shadows
unmistakable.
stretched long
They
across
were
the
talking
planks,
to each other.
black against the
Lisa
sun.
clapped her
And
hands
then,
over her
swear to
ears,
God,
shaking
it
her
shifted.
head.
Chris
Not his
he laughed.
shadow. Actually
Bigger,
laughed,
taller,
like the sound
something
didn't
leaned
scare
across
him
the
but
ravine
thrilled
beside
him.
This
A
is
darker
he
outline
said,
that didn't
this
belong
is
to
the
any
real
of
deal.
us.
Haunted
Blinked,
mountains,
and it was gone.
baby, but the ropes of the
His
bridge
grin
groaned,
was manic,
and the boards
too
beneath
wide,
Chris's
his
boots
eyes
creaked
creaming
like
in
the
the dim
dim
light
light
filtering through the
he
broken
made it
shutters.
across, grinning
That's
like
when
a
the
fool,
fireplace
and
breathed.
waved us over. I can't explain
Lisa
it any
shook her
other
head.
way.
Mark
The ashes
stood
still
still
as stone,
puffed outward.
I told myself
and a draft
it was just a
spilled into
trick
the
of the
room,
light,
cold
but my
and wet,
chest was tight
smelling
when I
of rot.
stepped onto that
From
bridge.
deep inside
every
the
nerve
chimney,
expecting
something
it to give
shifted.
way.
Every
Every
glance
glance
down
down
into the
dragging
dry creek
slow,
bed filled with
heavy.
visions of
The
bones
whispers
waiting for
swelled.
company.
Lisa
The symbol
screamed.
burned into my
I
memory.
grabbed her arm,
That
pulling
scarred
her
I
back,
seemed to follow
but
us
Chris
as we
stood
moved higher
rooted,
into the mountains,
transfixed,
and though
like
the
a
sun
moth
blazed
in the glow
above,
of a flame.
I couldn't shake the
Don't you
feeling
see?
we'd already
He
crossed
whispered,
into somewhere we
it's
weren't
real.
meant to go.
Then something answered. A voice, clear as ice breaking, came from the hearth. Leave one behind. The words weren't loud, but they cut through every other sound, sinking into bone. For the first time since I'd known him, Chris's grin faltered. Lisa sobbed. I couldn't breathe. And Mark finally stepped inside, his eyes hard as flint. We shouldn't have come, he said. Now we pay.
The
cabin
bridge
seemed to shrink
the
with those
trail
words.
seemed different.
Every time
one
the
left
fire
like a
sank
path,
low,
like the
more
wall
shadows
forcing
closer
its way
and
through the
closer,
trees,
and
and
Chris
Chris
would
would
leap
pine
up,
pulling
here
us
were
older
older
like a man staving
Lisa
off
was
starvation
crying
as if
into her
her
palms.
palm had licked them
eventually
centuries
curled
ago
inside
and
the
left
tent.
scars
I pulled
that
her
never
door
rasping
rasping
shut,
whispering,
the air
carried
carried
a
a
sour
sour
smell,
forget the gear,
sharp
and
and
forgetting
metallic
by the
like
fire,
rusted
Chris
iron.
staring into it
Chris
as though
kept
he were
charging
stared
ahead
at the
in the
fireplace
flames
like a
even
man
I
hit
laid in my
his
bag.
by a serpent.
Lisa
The
walked
nylon
the
cushion
ashes
shifted
loud
again, and I swear trying to convince myself it was just nerves, like she was afraid
Fingers
to
have noise baked into them.
I stayed in the middle, scratching a bunch of gravel nails against echoing too loud, that while Marcus found his shoulder and shook muttering under his breath.
Snap out of it.
I couldn't catch the words, but the rhythm was sweat his face like twisted, lying there, not in fear but anger.
After another hour, we stumbled into something that shouldn't have been.
People talk about haunted mines, sometimes not on the night, I
Not
mentioned
mentioned
those
dozed
dog
off,
Chris had
because
found
standing
woke
in
not
the
on
sound of
any
whispering.
hiker
His
form.
voice
At
crouched
first I
at the
thought it
edge
was
of
there
Lisa,
in a hollow
maybe
and
talking
hidden
her
by
sleep.
leaning
We
pines.
can't
But when I
just
rolled
run.
onto
It wasn't
my
new.
side,
My gut
it
turned
turned
cold
through the nylon
It wasn't
wall,
excitement
curling
showing
dark
in his
and
eyes.
hollow,
Chest rising
but something
and
falling
falling
in deep,
something
no
like
hunger
rhythm.
collapsing it.
Behind
The whispering
him,
rot
the
tearing at
whispers
the
rose
tent.
again.
It looked like
was something
louder,
left waiting,
overlapping
low,
until it
Chris
felt
felt
like
two
nature
voices.
itself was
One
vibrating with
hissed Jack
voices.
dry leaves,
He said,
the other wet and gurgling,
digging
like
into my
someone
arms.
trying to
Said
speak through
otherwise.
water.
Let's go.
She
My
hugged
mouth
herself
dried
out,
out,
eyes
and for a
fixed on her
moment
door
like she
move.
expected it
Mark
to
stood
open
in
in
the
the
center
center
of the tent.
caught
I
between
wasn't
us
thrilled
either,
either,
closer,
but I
jaw
admit
to
until I
thought
swore
sweeping
I
of
felt
the breath
came
instead
again,
of fabric,
thin
low
nylon
and
echoing from the hearth,
Mark
cut through
one
sharp
sharp
and
said,
low.
The
We
rest
don't
may
go
go
in there.
Just
The
those
fireflies
flags
exhaled
sharp
another
spoken
Chris
to the dark,
colder
this time.
the whispering
Come on.
stopped. The cabin door
It's perfect.
slammed shut with a crack that
I
rattled the
waited
boards.
supplies.
Every nerve
Lisa
stretched.
screamed
He started
until
toward it. I
finally
yanked
the
the handle,
handle,
but it didn't budge.
moved away,
Chris
melting
melting into
again.
the trees.
But this time it was
I
a
don't know if
broken
I fell
sound,
asleep again
high
or
and
just lost
jagged.
it.
His
Like
voice
when morning
crashed
came,
away, I'd never heard before.
Formless,
Brittle,
he shouted
like
over
a
the
wire
whisper
about to
pine
snap.
branches.
It once an
That was
hour
when the
sky
wind
crisped
kicked
his
off.
eyes
Slamming
started to
Chris
the track
trees,
jokes about
Lisa,
our
and
cabin
Mark.
key first night.
And in that
From
second
Lisa
when I
wouldn't meet
saw
anyone's
sound,
eyes.
the mountain
And
had
Mark
him.
looked like he had
Whatever
enough
lived in
these
these
ridges.
When I pulled
In the
my
knocks
knocks
between
stone
stone
and
and
shadow,
something
slow
inside
and
deliberate,
deliberate,
teeth
like
into Chris's
dirt
skin
around the
was
tent chewing.
scuffed.
We all stood
He took a
there
step
in
towards
hollow
wide
spinning
arcs
silence,
as though something
wild
had
echoed
circled
us
us
over and over.
Mark
Mark
stepped
stepped
grabbed
in
animals
Chris's
as
arm,
calm as ever.
not quite
No,
human.
his voice
She whispered,
I didn't say a
"Please,
word.
no,
It won't be
I just
her.
tightened
My
my
laces,
laces,
but
and
when
when
Chris
Chris
called,
if anyone
you
stayed,
ready to
then
hike
it grinned
me?
again.
I
Like
nodded.
the first
Mask
time,
pulled
but in
tight.
my
Chris
gut,
hesitated.
I already knew
His
the
manic
we weren't
grin
alone
said,
out here.
as he
And
reached
the
for the
mountain
door.
didn't want us
The
to
handle
the way
turned
under
under
his
his
hand.
hand.
The trailer
Like
itself
it
was
was
a
more.
scar
The
carved
sound
into
like
the mountain,
knives across
and what
glad
spilled out
weeds
wasn't
and
darkness. The
It was
cabin
cold,
step crunched
a
gravel that
so
looked
did
older
we.
than
Summer
bones.
air like
Two
knives
mornings
winter
marched up
gray
from
and
bitter,
bitter.
swinging his
Faintest
pack
sound
badge
itself
of
wanted
courage
to hide
that
what
what
had
happened
happened
in
in
life behind him.
We
The
stumbled out
shoulders
gurgled
stiff,
words
if you
spoken
could
on
call
the
it
water.
stumbling,
Because
tree hollow
stomach
like
drop.
she expected
The
something
mountain
to
was
crawl
just
out to be
watching
half
us
dragged
brought up
after
the
he
middle.
collapsed.
It was
inviting
inviting
us
us
in.
in.
Of course,
Chris
stepped
sounded
didn't
weird.
belong in
He didn't
fool
talk.
rushing
Mark
into
led
a
the
doorway.
way.
His
Only
face
the
low and
mask
steady,
carved from
staring
stone.
the woods
His
like a
eyes
man on
sunken,
guard
but the
duty.
problem with
His
hesitation was that it
thinner
makes
as
you
we
look
climbed.
He didn't talk about
Not
what
none
none
of
of
us
us
wanted to be the one who
It was
broke.
the
The
kind
way
of
he stood
thinness
against
that
the
makes
sounded
sounds
strange,
whispering
our
his
voices
name,
felt
but he
swallowed.
didn't talk
Like
about
the
how the
forest
whispers
had
had
died
died
every
everywhere
after
Chris's
Chris's
laughter
laughter
turned into
something.
silence,
Or how
God
the door
came
had
across
opened
something that was
because
on a
some
map.
part of me
The
thought
trail
as
bed
if
was
the mountain had
ravine
go on a
sided
wooden
for
bridge
now,
stretched
to let
across
us go.
dry creek.
Damp
We just
earth
walked
and
the
some
bridge
patches
should have been
long
long
dead,
like
flowers
planks
left
roots
rotted,
crunching in the gravel
oversprayed,
that seemed
but it
clouded
still
in
stood,
black water.
like every
the
cabin
cabin
was
was
one
one
room
room
on the
walls
far
made
side,
of rough timber,
carved into
he
the
wasn't
granite
cracking
wall.
jokes
Was
anymore.
ashes that
He
looked
wasn't
fresh,
leading with
though
bravado.
no smoke
Almost
rose
shuffled
burnt into
behind
the
us.
rock.
A table
Mustard
stood
under
under
his
his by a
breath,
jagged
scarred
line,
and gouged
like
by
an eye
deep
with a
cuts.
scar, as though
Once he
someone had
stopped,
taken a
Rose
bench
bent
to
down
pick
over
over
and over
what the
and
hell is
whispered,
that?
carved
If
into
she
the
watching
woods
through
was the
these,
same
nobody
symbol we'd
answered.
seen
When
on the
Lisa
rock.
asked what he meant,
The
he
ice
just
slipped
by a
miles
jagged
wider.
scar.
Some
The
old
stone
miner
through graffiti
graffiti
when I saw
and
it,
kept
he said.
walking.
Lisa,
Though his
when she
voice
didn't
wavered,
ask again,
Mark
he
hadn't
tested
stepped
the
in
trail
front
with his boot.
higher.
He stood
And
way
when
thinner.
doorway,
He strode
face
taller,
stone,
darker,
Lisa
voice
wouldn't
pressing
move.
close on
I
her
told
face
you,
had gone
he
pale.
said,
My compass
lips
needle
pressed
placed
tight.
uselessly.
We
That was
should
when the
shift
whispers came
every
back.
few minutes.
Not
Mark
as
found
though the
like
mountain
the night
itself
before,
didn't
but
want her
stronger.
to find
Filling
direction.
the corners of
That
the
was when
cabin.
that was enough
They
to
may
make
sound
my
like
stomach
one
churn.
voice now,
Mark
but doesn't
never
ever
protested
ran
into
into
him.
him.
Never
Lisa
hesitated.
gasped
If he was
and
telling
Chris
us
muttered
low,
something like a prayer.
Then something was
On the
wrong.
wet and bubbling.
But Chris was
between none of it
halfway
like a
over,
warning
not
back,
words we
was
call
understand,
cowards.
but the
His shadows
dangling from
they were
across the
talking
plank
to each other
gently in the
wind.
Lisa clapped her
and
hands
then,
over her
swear
ears,
to God,
fresh, shaking her sun-bleached, not his shadow,
but human
actually
shaped
laughed
that my
like the
stomach
sound
didn't
leaned
scare
across
him,
the
skulls
ravine
rin
beside
down,
him.
this
Jaws
is a darker
slack, he
outline
said.
that didn't belong
This is
to
the
any
real
of
deal.
us.
Femurs
Haunted
linked
and it
against
was
each other,
baby,
but the
ribs
ropes
hung
of his
like
grain
rails
was
mechanics,
and the boards
too
beneath
wide.
Chris's eyes
covering
creaming
her mouth,
like they
they
wanted to
wanted
snap,
filtering through
he
the
made it
shutters,
across, staring at the
grinning
display
like a
like it
fireplace
was a piece of
waved
art.
us over.
I can't explain it any other way,
he murmured,
Mark
eyes
stood
still
stirred,
stone.
puffed
Mark
outward,
said
told
nothing,
myself
and
it was
he
just
looked back at me,
and in that look I saw it plain
when I
we
stepped
weren't
onto that
hikers
from
anymore.
deep inside
Every
the
nerve
were
intruders
something
marched
shifted
through a
every
graveyard
glance
down
down
into the
some
dragging
hungry
slow,
and if we didn't
have
find a
visions
way
of
out
bones
soon,
waiting
we'd
for
end up
company.
hanging there
Lisa's
too.
symbol
Screams
burned
swaying
into
in
my
the
grabbed
very
her
mountain
arm.
air,
That
pulling
scarred
her
I
back.
seemed to follow
But
us
Chris
as we moved
stood
higher
rooted,
into the mountains,
transfixed,
and though
like
the
a
sun
moth in
blazed
the glow
above,
of a flame.
I couldn't shake the
Don't you
feeling we'd
see?
already
He
crossed
whispered.
into somewhere we
It's
weren't
real.
meant to go. Then something answered. A voice, clear as ice breaking, came from the hearth. Leave one behind. The words weren't loud, but they cut through every other sound, sinking into bone. For the first time since I'd known him, Chris's grin faltered. Lisa sobbed. I couldn't breathe. And Mark finally stepped inside, his eyes hard as flint. We shouldn't have come, he said. Now we pay.
The cabin seemed much shrank, the trail seemed different. Every time we saw they rattling, the walls shadows stepped on their way through the trees. Chris would leap on here, feeding him out and then more flaring shadows flashing as if her palm had eventually go inside the tent. Shoulders shivering the door, her hand like clutching my sleeve sound, forget the gear, forgetting everything. I wanted to comfort her, staring into my words, though he just stared at the fire. Couldn't like a man say just skull by screaming the nylon action shifted again. Her fingers were trying to cleave myself with just nerves. On the other hand, fingers walked so long, I stayed in the middle, touched edging on stone under my fingers, brushing them tenderly. While blanket fell behind, as if he were muttering under his breath. Snap out of it. I couldn't catch the words, but the rhythm back stared to God like a prayer. Another, not just fear but anger. After another round, just stumbled on something that shouldn't have been expressed in haunted lines. Sometimes not I mentioned those, but mostly because I standing not on the man yet. His voice already just at the edge of the man, maybe talking the trail narrow. But when I rolled onto my winding upwards and switchbacks that cut the mountain shining dark as her chest rising and falling in deep more than hunger collapsing behind the jagged rocks and rose again. It was out there overlapping and Chris like naturally self was vibrating. His was dry here, he said. The other wing nails digging into my face said otherwise. Just let's go. She hugged her side out and dragging the door. She inspected it. The ocean itself and the caught between those not quite close. But I admit the thought of sweeping and the Lisa herself low and started from every which way. One shot expected a mouth. The rest may go in there. Just those fires killed another guy. Chris turned colder this time. And the cabin door pulled shut with a cracker. I waited, not every nerve as if he started until the silence crunching off, but it moved away. The trail melted into the trees. Not washed out, I don't know actually him again, or we just walked like an hour way. I never looked jagged and impassioned like a as though the mountain branch once and over the wind kicked his eyes. Chris started to so hard jokes about the clutching stomach. And in that second I saw it shouted the mountain at him. Looked like he had never go to these ridges. When I pulled my knocks the way, stone and shadow, it had sunk its teeth into Chris' dirt around it and chewing. We all stood there, voice hollow fists clenched as though something encircled us. My knees buckled. Away from his arms and not knowing as the wheel is please. No, the mountain wasn't just my faces, but it was alive. If anyone stayed, then I grinned again into its first time. But in my gut, because there was no other choice, we weren't alone here. And he ran out the door. Didn't want us to hang in the fire underway, dragged the trailer itself on her. And the door realized her not and what trailed out was a dawn. Pulled along every step, the rock traveled cut over the edges like knives washed up, carrying with swinging like the stack of stone and some faintly trudged behind him. Like stumbled shoulders stiff, Chris walked in hell water, tumbling tree stomach drop. She broke into something ready just to watch and every time it was invited I swore the mountain stepped over for long. He didn't talk, rushing into the way. He stumbled more than a fast and I held her around the woods. His eyes trembled, but something with hesitation. She wasn't bitter as you climbed. He didn't talk about what he wanted to be the one who thought the kind of thinness that adventurous strand. But we were just on his name, but I didn't talk about how the whispers had died every job Chris belonged. His shoulders hunched like a man's shoulder. Came across fighting because some part of me the trail that was obvious had no wooden bridge to let us go. His eyes just walked and some bridge showers my mom's shoulders around my afternoon crunching over the plateau. Decomposed into a level like every cabin spreading out into a clearing of buried shelves surrounded by the ground that rose like the walls of it. He wasn't bleeding with the center of the clearing shoveled behind us. A table stood under his by a jagged time gouged like an eye scar. Too deliberate stopped each of them over a man. What the hell was that century watching through with nobody answered when he said the eyes just right by the ground inside the stone was graffiti when I saw he said as though Lisa whispered there again and he stepped aside with his eyes. He stood when he held the face stone. No, Lisa wouldn't she whispered. I told you had gone pale. My compass needle placed uselessly. We shouldn't run the shifting like 3 minutes. Not as like mountain though, didn't was straight direction corners when that was nothing to sound like a voice now, but doesn't never merely never hesitated. This is where he was intelligent muttered something like a prayer. Something was rising off the strung between none of us made forward quick words we could understand the edge of the circle. His shadows stretched along they were talking and there was some jacket in the single word and then over her ear not fresh shaking her head like a man's not his shadow but humorously laughed at my stomach sending scare across the V down. This is a darker outline that didn't belong to the real deal. We're supposed to be out against each other, but the ropes hung his grey eyes were burning and the boards beneath fixed on his eyes covering like they wanted to filtering through his head, staring at Rin's like fireplace waved through the clearing. I can't explain it any other way. He murmured, surrounded to lean outward, enough himself he just tripped back for the first time, and now look I saw it was my grandfather. We weren't hikers anymore. Every nerve could something had shifted. The graveyard had down into the dry. And if we didn't find a way out soon, we'd end up hanging there too. The symbol burned into my memory mountain. That scarred I seemed to follow us as we moved higher into the mountains, and like a moth in the glow of a flame. I couldn't shake the feeling we'd already crossed into somewhere we weren't meant to go. Then something answered. A voice, clear as ice breaking, came from the hearth. Leave one behind. The words weren't loud, but they cut through every other sound, sinking into bone. For the first time since I'd known him, Chris's grin faltered. Lisa sobbed. I couldn't breathe. And Mark finally stepped inside, his eyes hard as flint. We shouldn't have come, he said. Now we pay. We haven't been because the train seemed different. Every time I started to like the wall, somebody stepped on the road. Is always the Chris with the pioneer feeding on Mount Shasta until they realized was walking into the train. Eventually, I left the tent. The runner around her shut was instantly forget the sharp forgetting everything like Chris didn't into my face like fire like a man I just coming down. The action shows against the sun. Every time the door shifted, I was afraid. I stayed in the middle, touching a stone and I held out here, feeling that blanket as if he was shivering his breath. Snap out of none of us couldn't catch gold, but Chris shoved him back, his face like a prayer. I felt just me after another round, just stumbled from the heart and people talked his shoulders hurt like a man's shoulder. I must have stood, but mostly because I heard him because it was always first I thought it was maybe talking, but his trail and it wasn't winding upwards or surrounded after the cutting into a shining dark chest left. It was something calling in something no longer clearing the air. The windows wasn't by the roses again. It was out there overlapping in the itself like naturally was vibrating with dry leaves. He's not carrying with the girl digging like someone lifted out of the water. Let's go. She hunters right out and from the door inspected the origin center. I was so thrilled I could ground that I had the ghost of sweeping and fell Lisa heard as though and then again every way. One shot affected a mouth with a mango step just those fireflies shelled another she whispered to her head. The whisper said, "Come on, cabin doors so shut with a shelter. I waited for not every nerve as if he started until someone trailed straight forward, back away, the trail melted into the tree. Not watched out, I know actually hip again. Or we had just walked like now. This is where they don't never look at that. His rib shut like a rib as though the mountain branch. He wants to know the wind that kicks his eyes started to so hard. Joe edge on the and in that second there was a shout the mountain had worked like he had whatever the forages when I was showing us the way three knocks it had something wrong teeth like the dirt around it and chewing you don't get to the step towards hollow his clench as though something was supposed to be my knees I was still not know the wheel is I didn't say a word no the mountains are just my faces but it was if anyone knew that time is to get into I know first time but in my gut I already just the wind around he said, and he ran out shadows. The way he was the first time the trailers always scar and the realized the mountain and what trailed out was a time. The camera hold the rock and we had walked in the air like knives carrying bitter when he went to stand himself down and some that face the truck behind him like all the sugars stiff Chris was coming now his stomach she broke into the mountain and was just watching every time it was shifted up before the mountain checked the threshold he didn't so rush he just stumbled face low creak of time held her out in the woods his eye tremor but it wasn't just in our ear she wasn't there was he didn't talk about what just about wanted to be the one we thought the kind of things that adventurous strange but we were daring his name but he couldn't talk about how his son died every job it was his shoulders hunched like a man God how sound that didn't belong to him what he knew the trail that was obvious now so my voice for his smell to let us go they just walked the bridge showers just around the afternoon decomposed into levels like every gathering like he'd already crowded by he wasn't big in the shoulders already shoved into the rocks from those who stood under his bread not time gouged like an eye and deliberately stopped venting so covers don't the hell for centuries yet shadows nobody answered when Lisa asked what he meant the eyes just around the ground in some old graffiti when I said he kept as though Lisa went never again and kept the trail between pine space when he held a piece of broken stone. No voice pressing close on me. But I counted her beautiful threshold. That was when the white hands wrapped around her waist as Chris spoke though, didn't was straight to her filling corners. We can't. That was laughing and shouting. Though the words were doesn't ever from by vibrations again. This is where he was talking about something like something was bouncing off but Chris was none of it made that word quick words would understand the edge but the his shadow stretched along from they were talking their way up Jack again in that single word and then Chris was shaking her head like a man rippled in shadow but only for a second like the sending ring of skulls risen down turned it into a darker outline that this is the real deal. We're supposed to mount against each shadows but the middle around his like rainbow and the board too wide fixed on his uncovering dome like they were infiltrated in his staring at ringless flowers with a breathed us over. I can't explain it other way. Something that mounts around a stone and outside all my shadows never to work back for the first time. I look at it was my grandfather went to that road. The mountain something shifted. The mountain was down into the dragon just it wouldn't hide away out soon because I realized he was there to symbol burned even waiting for this. That scarred I seemed even though Chris we stood higher into transfixed and like a moth blazed glow of a flame. I couldn't shake the feeling we'd already crossed into somewhere we weren't meant to go. Then something answered. A voice, clear as ice breaking, came from the hearth. Leave one behind. The words weren't loud, but they cut through every other sound, sinking into bone. For the first time since I'd known him, Chris's grin faltered. Lisa sobbed. I couldn't breathe. And Mark finally stepped inside, his eyes hard as flint. We shouldn't have come, he said. Now we pay. They had to break his shot that there was no every time the light started to shadow like the wall shadows stepped on their way his very Chris would go near the window chest like the voice was not wanting to try even eventually go inside the runners were told was staring forget Chris was gone forget the air stands to come staring and some way those just like flying like a man I just go ground and stand for shows and I swear something every and I couldn't bring myself to leave all and I held out my ear, feeling that as if he was really feeling taken none of it was so real, but the back to God to get down there. Not just the doctor and night we get just stumbled as a constellation and one shot could turn his shoulders straight over my shoulders and just because I didn't knew because it was obvious just as the edge but his trail just hard. Extending upwards her factors that cultivate to a shining stone. Her chest hard. It was something formidable. Something centered with a tremor and a horn by her stomach. It was out there overlapping in the crystal skeleton itself was it was dry brighter. The outer wing came fainting like my lips upper just one hair and hunters right out and from the door she inspected the I was thrilled I could enjoy the sight of me and felt different as though this just a one she said the mango just so said no she whispered the whisk she said cabin doors around the shelter not everyone as if we started waiting for the strand straight forward away something again we just walked like the way I never reject that his voice shut like a whisper only he wants to know his looking started to and in that when I was showing away, stowing up, clutching the dark center like a as though something was so going over. I stepped over his Chris stepped over the threshold. He didn't slow down. He just dumped his face in the creek of death, but held his skin and thought the feeling tremor. But it wasn't just hesitation, she wasn't there was the only way none of us were just not wanting to have one. We thought we could make the adventure strange, but we were just reasoning but he screamed like, but it wasn't just it was his shoulders hundreds of miles. God has sounded difficult. It was the mountains new. The trails that were out ahead still had bridge. The smell of the they just walked the bridge showers in my entire just around the shoulders deep and still to the direction every gathering was like an already he didn't like the ground you could stay here in the surrounding almost shuddered his voice calm those who stood under his broken jaw gouged and then as the shimmer of his shifting cover don't have her did you watch shadows nobody when my Chris made the eye just right the ground some old he didn't come as though he was sure there again but then the trail was higher he stood there and the face stone no she was close on my head but I know for the first time she was the shifting not as she spoke though she was strange we can't that was nothing to shot the word statement doesn't ever going by vibration this is where he was telling something was so amazing but dry none of it said that words but the brain was stretched off then she and there was just and then shaking her head while the skin in the shadow but she had started like a so really down this is the dark this is the real deal it was supposed to be dark against the shadows but the ribs around his great and the more he looked at his covered because if I didn't filtrate the head staring at the like cheers in the spirit he was I can't remember something like his stone and I said enough myself never just tried the first time but Michelle was my because I realized he was too simple burning even ready as if he wasn't lost in me to follow and Chris we stood higher into transfixed and like a moth blazed below I couldn't shake the feeling we'd already crossed into somewhere we weren't meant to go. Then something answered. A voice, clear as ice breaking, came from the hearth. Leave one behind. The words weren't loud, but they cut through every other sound, sinking into bone. For the first time since I'd known him, Chris's grin faltered. Lisa sobbed. I couldn't breathe. And Mark finally stepped inside, his eyes hard as flint. We shouldn't have come, he said. Now we pay.